Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, where each time we meet, we run down the IT news of the week with a variable degree of snarkiness. As you can tell, I am not Steven, and Max is not Tom, but we are here this week to fill in for them. I am your host, Brian Knutson, and joining me today is Max Martillero. Max, say hi to everybody.
Hello. Hey, good to see you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for joining me for substituting for Steven and Tom. Today is National Read a Book Day, so we're going to talk a bunch and then maybe encourage you to go read a book, but not until we're done, because we've got a lot of good stuff to talk about. It's also kind of the day that we're all going to go off and say goodbye to WordPad, as Microsoft has kind of announced that that's going to go away. But let's dive into the news from the last week. Intel's contract manufacturing division, Intel Foundry Services, has secured a deal with Tower Semiconductor to provide foundry services and capacity after Intel's failed attempt to acquire Tower. Tower will utilize Intel's 300mm wafer manufacturing capacity in New Mexico, expanding its fabrication capabilities for advanced analog chips in power management and radio frequency. The deal represents Intel's strategy to leverage its global factory network to help companies enhance capacity across different regions, following the termination of the acquisition agreement due to approval changes. Is this a setback for Intel, or do they have a plan B, Max?
Well, I think, Brian, that it's a setback for Intel because clearly they were looking at acquiring this company to kind of expand their capabilities and be fully in control of what needs to be done. So, I mean, the plan B obviously is that they managed to sign a contract with the company, but overall, if you look at the strategy that Intel has adopted, which is to be very aggressive in building up their capabilities, the thing is, if they have to rely on external suppliers and outsourcing, contracts and stuff of this kind, it's kind of not being quite what the original plan was envisioned. So I think that it's kind of the plan B, for the moment, but still it's definitely a setback. So with that, our next story is about HPE. So HPE is undergoing a transition from selling hardware to subscription-based models, leading to mixed results in its fiscal Q3 2023. So while the overall revenues have increased slightly to over $7 billion, HPE Corp server business is in decline as server buyers are cautious about the economy and reluctant to invest in new hardware, even with the new processors from AMD and Intel. HPE's Intelligent Edge business, driven by the successful acquisition of Aruba Networks, saw significant growth, contributing to the company overall operating profits, but the compute and storage divisions are experiencing a slower period. Does this mean the Edge is here to stay this time?
Yeah, I think it does. Obviously, the Aruba acquisition was a big one for HPE. Made a huge difference in their overall product line, and when it comes to the edge side of things, becomes a key piece of that. Obviously, their experience with the server and storage side of things can play into that edge story, but the connectivity of edge sometimes is the most difficult piece, and isn't, or I should say, wasn't before a core part of HPE's business. So it's good to see that that's actually having the effect and kind of following the expectations that we all had for it when it happened. It's always good to see an acquisition help the company thrive, rather than it be bits and pieces that sometimes happen in the background. We've seen every version of that with HPE. So yeah, I mean, the edge is here to stay. It's a solid use case as data gets bigger and bigger and becomes more important to process in the right place. The edge becomes a key piece of that solution as you get big data sets out in the field that need to be processed as quickly as possible and acted upon as quickly as possible. You don't need the lag going back and forth there. So it's not surprising to see that that's what's floating HPE right now. Pure and Nutanix both recently announced their financial statements as well, and had similar improvements. I think slightly better than HPE overall, though HPE was pretty far up there. Of course, for those two companies, storage is a much bigger part of the puzzle for them. So, overall, the industry is getting better. Year over year, quarter over quarter, things are improving. And I think this is a great guide to that, that helps to exemplify the fact that things are improving there. In fact, Rubrik has reported enlisting 7 additional banks to assist with its IPO. So they're moving even stronger towards an IPO thing. And that's in addition to the 3 previously disclosed underwriters, which included Goldman Sachs, Barclays, and Citigroup. The company, whose investors include Microsoft and various capital venture firms, have been steadily growing its software subscription annual recurring revenue, reaching over 500 million in January, up to 400 million in August 2022, or compared to August 2022. Its CEO has expressed the company's readiness to go public when the time is right. Obviously, a lot of companies looking at when is the time right with the current financial situation. So, Max, what do you think? Is this a good move for Rubrik at this point?
It's a great question here. uh, I was also wondering, whether is the right time for this move. But looking at what you were talking before, the results that we're seeing from Pure, from Nutanix, from even HP, even if HP is a bit more mitigated somehow. I mean, it feels like we're seeing a kind of a restart, after a year and a half of kind of recession and a pretty much, let's say, gloomy picture for the whole industry overall. So, I mean, sometimes you hear that the time is never right to do something, but at some point you have to do it. So I would say that overall, if I'm looking at what Rubrik has achieved recently, I'm not going to look at the financials, but looking in terms of the capabilities, looking at their ability to deliver and so on. It looks like they're definitely doing some good stuff. And I mean, the number seems to be backing that actually, so I mean, if not now, when? I mean, at some point they have to make the move, and they're in a market where we're seeing more and more competition. We're seeing a lot of data protection companies repositioning themselves in the security field, in cyber resiliency. There's some convergence also with data management. So those companies, at some point, maybe they need to make a move there. So I think yes, it's now or never probably. And maybe that's a bit of a radical statement, but I mean, they've been talking about that for years, so yeah, good for them. I hope they just get moving with that. And while we're talking, about cyber resiliency and security threats and this repositioning of data protection in this area, there's one good story here that you were sharing recently. So, one of the most innovative parts of the industry is what's happening with ransomware gangs. And what started with holding encryption keys for ransomware has morphed into a series of extortion schemes, the latest of which appears to be demands to pay for protection from GDPR fines. That's a great one. Is this a new tactic which is going to work?
Yeah, I think it will. GDPR has proven that it's not just a veneer. It's a real thing. It's causing real consequences. I think the most one of the more recent fines was one of the biggest ones, which I think amounted to about $1 billion US. So it's not something to sneeze at. Um, it makes a lot of sense too in a lot of ways. So if we look at traditional ransomware, like you mentioned, was just we'll encrypt the files and we'll give you the key if you give us money. And they found that, hey, and I've told this to a lot of customers over the years, that if they could touch your data in order to encrypt it, they can touch your data to exfiltrate it and take it away, which means they can do all sorts of things with that. Which means, next, after you pay the ransom to get your key and hopefully unlock all of your data, which rarely happens, you end up with a situation where they've got your data, and now they could say, okay, well, give us more money and we won't release the data that we found. And then they came into this place where they said, hey, we won't release your data publicly, but we'll go to your customers and tell them we have their data, and if you don't pay us more money. And then they go to the customers and they say, hey, we've got your data, we'll release it. There's been all sorts of other extortions that have come and gone. This one appears to be more theoretical today, but I think it's important to highlight these things to make sure that people broadly know what these things are, because I think we defang them when we kind of put them in the light and we talk about them. So the idea here is that, hey, your data getting breached can potentially result in GDPR fines. And so they're kind of doing, like old New York mafia used to do, is go around and say, hey, we'll protect you. You give us this much money, and we'll protect you from all the bad people, completely ignoring the fact that they were the bad people they were protecting you from. So it's a little bit of just pay us, and we won't bother you type of a thing. Is kind of what this sounds like they may be aiming for. Supposedly they have the group that's responsible for this, and there's names out there. I won't name them. I'm big on not naming the bad guys, but being able to say, hey, we have infiltrated some companies, but they haven't really shown any evidence that they've actually used this extortion scheme. So I'm not sure that this is ever going to see things in the wild. But I think it's important for us all to think about the ways that our data can be misused, the way that these breaches can be used against us, and force us to have to pay for things that we shouldn't have to. So really, really important story, I think, from that perspective, just to shine light on some of the innovative ways that ransomware companies are out there doing things, and they are companies. Recently, Huawei has launched the Ocean Store Pacific 9920, an all-flash array with scale-out design and various configurations, powered by either ARM-based processors or Intel-based CPUs. The system offers up to 20 gigabytes per second of bandwidth and supports various storage access protocols, including NFS, SMB, and S3. Additionally, Huawei's Ocean Store software suite includes smart application aware compression and ransomware protection features, allowing it to detect ransomware attacks and recover data from isolation zone using secure snapshots in a worm file system. Max, what do you think about all that?
Well, I think it's extremely exciting. The first thing which is worth mentioning is that Huawei, being a Chinese company, is not available in the US for reasons. There are several perspectives here before I talk on that itself. So first thing, we're soon going to cover very probably Huawei for the first time in the upcoming GigaOM ransom radar for primary storage. So that should be coming up around November. So that just falls in time because we're going to talk about that. Unfortunately, those ransomware features were not announced previously, so we were not able to include them in the just recently released report on ransomware protection for primary storage. But that said, what can we pick up here? Huawei is as a very compelling solution. I mean, it's really interesting, especially with these new features they've been implementing. It's probably very much price competitive, especially if you're outside of the US, because as I say, it's not available over there. The company is a bit struggling with some of the markets in Europe because they are seen as a kind of a Trojan horse for the Chinese government. I mean, we could argue here endlessly whether American companies have also some kind of hidden stuff over there, but it's what it is. But in a sense, what I think is exciting there is that we're seeing a company which is coming from somewhere else, not from the US, from China, which is coming up with some interesting features, which is competing. The thing which is interesting there is the ARM-based processors for, let's say, power and energy efficient configurations. So it remains to be seen here what's the kind of use case you want to go with that. If you're more going to be on balanced, a mix between acceptable performance and capacity-oriented systems. But I think that's overall super exciting. And that's one thing I'm going to look pretty much in detail. It's also trying to understand what's going on in the Chinese market of technology, because that's something that we look always with our Westerner eyes, is one of the reasons why I've been starting learning Chinese recently, by the way. So I look forward to improve my Chinese to read better press releases in the future. And with that, let's move to HashiCorp, which has transitioned to the business source license to maintain a balance between open source principles and commercial interests. The BSL permits open source use and derivative works, but imposes restrictions on commercial use, preventing companies from creating clones of HashiCorp's platform or offering it as a cloud service without a negotiation for a commercial license. So this shift aims to protect HashiCorp's intellectual property and commercial viability while fostering an open source community. This has been in the news already, I think, in the past 1 or 2 weeks. It seems that it's still kind of stirring up, emotions in the community. Do you think it's a smart move?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously the stirring up of emotions is absolutely legit. And there's a lot of strong opinions on every side of it. I've recently heard some people say it is not a great time to be a product manager at HashiCorp, because you have to deal with this. So the open source software movement, really started off in the 90s, really gained traction with the .com boom, and has steadily increased since then, to be a standard fixture in the environment. And we oftentimes see companies leading the charge with a given open source project, and they kind of become synonymous with the open source project. And then once they grow to a certain point, they've got to figure out how to balance this open source and making it freely available to everybody, but also being able to have a sustainable business around that. We've seen recent controversies with Red Hat and how they're dealing with their Linux distributions. SUSE has had some similar things. So it's nothing new, for us to see this balance try to get the strike of that balance, try to get made. So yeah, it's probably a smart move from a business perspective. HashiCorp, the company, has to sustain somehow. Um, you know, there's also questions about building your business based on other people's free work, that need to be taken into consideration. It's just an area that's difficult to navigate for sure. So I give HashiCorp a lot of leeway, a lot of grace in this, because they're trying to figure out how to make a business. They also need to try to stay true to their open source roots, and try to satisfy those companies that have built on that. Um, as part of all this, and I'm no expert when it comes to open source agreements and licenses, so I'll try to avoid going too deep into that. But it really is important that as you're building software and you're using open source software as part of that one, you understand what the current licensing is very closely, and two, you understand what the future of that could potentially be. So for those companies that are freaking out because, all of a sudden they're going to have to start paying royalties to HashiCorp, or they may have to eliminate their software. One, it's important to understand that any software that's been shipped at this point is kind of grandfathered in, because the license, I believe, follows the versioning. So it's important that they understand that. A lot of companies are building their stuff on HashiCorp's technologies, and they have, those companies, as long as they're not reselling that software, I think are okay. They're buying the commercial software anyways, hopefully, and have that level of support and all that. So is it a smart move for the company? Yes. Is it a smart move for the industry, for the community around that software? Maybe not. It gives other people downstream a lot less flexibility, but at the same time, is that loss of flexibility worth it if HashiCorp were to not be able to sustain themselves and maintain the software in the long run? I think a lot of people need to think about the whole picture in that regard, as so many things in IT tend to be. Moving on, Quantum is enhancing its data infrastructure products to simplify the movement of backup, file, and object data between private cloud and public cloud environments. The company has introduced the DXi CloudShare FlexSync 3 and ActiveScale cold replication to enable the transfer of unstructured data of various purposes, including tiering, retention, and integrated public-private cloud workflows. These enhancements aim to provide customers with greater flexibility in managing their data across the entire data lifecycle, fostering hybrid cloud workflows tailored to the unique requirements and objectives. What do you think of this, Max?
I think this is a great move from Quantum, and a move which is absolutely essential. Since they're mentioning, I think this is related somehow to two of their products, StoreNext, which is their platform they've used traditionally to manage, video edition, large video files and very large data repositories. And I think they're also doing some stuff on their new next generation platform, which is Myriad. It's an important move because obviously, I guess that everybody who's dealing with very large swaths of data wants to have the ability to store them. Some of it needs to be retained somehow, and if you want to store it, you want to store it in an affordable tier. So while some organizations which are managing multi-petabyte deployments have the opportunity to leverage, for example, tape libraries as let's say, a very cold glacier-like tier. So using an S3 gateway, and I think, by the way, ActiveScale does provide the capability. You also, not everybody can afford, putting a tape library on site, right? So you may want to have the ability to move data to the cloud, whether you want to use, Glacier, Azure Blob, cold storage, or whatever those tiers are called. So it's absolutely essential. And I think the other thing they're doing here with FlexSync is the ability to where they're adding new replication mechanisms so that you can replicate the data, tier the data, and so on. So in general, it's a really smart move from Quantum. I would say that it's Quantum. You have to take into consideration that it's a company which has been around for quite a while. So they are sometimes known for more kind of legacy-like stuff, like tape libraries and so on. But they have been working on releasing Myriad for a long time already. So they knew that they needed to do something with StoreNext, moving to the next generation of workloads, which is what Myriad is going to address, and adding those capabilities provide the flexibility that customers need, right? Sometimes you may want to replicate data because when you're working on these edition streams, you may want to follow follow the sun model where you have different teams working on files at a different time and so on. So for me, it's an absolute great move from Quantum. And moving on to our friend Windows again. Back in 2008, TLS version 1.2 was officially published, and 10 years later, TLS 1.3 was published, and since then the industry has been pretty heavily turned against TLS 1.0 and 1.1. Microsoft has recently reminded users that future versions of Windows will disable these old versions by default. While they will be able to re-enable the older encryption algorithms manually, is this finally the nudge the industry needs to move to the more secure version of TLS?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. Microsoft is obviously has such a core piece of the industry that as they make moves to kind of nudge and then eventually force people to make changes, they've got a lot of power there. I think it was 2018, 2019 timeframe that Microsoft and a bunch of others kind of got together and said, we need to start pushing things. We're going to start the migration over. And of course, here we are, 4 or 5 years later, and they're finally taking the first really big move. I mean, in the past, they've made 1.3 the default, but allowed 1.1, 1.0 to be utilized. And now they're finally getting to the point where like, okay, we're not going to enable it by default. It'll still be there. You can turn it on. You have to go into the registry and hack it, essentially to get it up there, but there's a path to do it. They've got some very specific error messages that they'll log based on errors around that. And they've also published a list of a bunch of applications they found that straight up break. Some of those are their own, like SQL Server still uses some of the old TLS. So there's going to be some situations around that. Not only the old stuff that's no longer supported, but the stuff that is still in active support as well as extended support. And they've gone through a bunch of other popular, they've even identified a specific version of Safari that will be challenged with that, because this is going to apply both to the server and the client side of the Windows operating system. So long story short, yes, this is a good move. We need to get to a more secure place. Since 2018, 2019, when they made that declaration, we've obviously seen a big turn in the security space, where security is forefront in everybody's mind. Nobody can ignore it anymore. I know the TLS warnings have been flapping for a long time in the wind, and it is time for us to move on to the next level. Obviously, as you mentioned, Max, 1.2 has been out for well over a decade now, so it's something that we should definitely be looking at moving towards a more secure place, and getting ourselves into that better space. Moving on, Dell Technologies and AMD are at the forefront of high-performance computing, driving innovation in various fields such as space exploration, wildfire prevention, and neuroscience research. Their HPC solutions are in high demand, revolutionizing industries by accelerating productivity, enabling faster market entry, and offering energy-efficient infrastructure modernization. Dell's PowerEdge servers, equipped with the latest AMD 4th generation EPYC processors, provide accessible and easy to deploy high performance solutions for partners serving customers of all sizes, emphasizing optimization for maximum performance right out of the box. What do you think of this partnership moving forward?
Well, I think that in general, when vendors, server vendors, are offering choice to their customers, it's always a great thing. It's something that where Dell in the past has not been that flexible with AMD-based configuration, or rather, and I can talk about that on the customer side as well. Customers have not always seen the immediate benefit of using, of combining Dell and AMD processors. So the fact that they're partnering on that is a great move, absolutely. It's also a great move because of what AMD has been working on in its processors, let's say, portfolio. And what I would say there is that let's say the processor landscape has been, let's say, gradually changing, and probably you'll agree with me on that. In the past few years, AMD has gone from being a challenger, and they were not even at some point in time present in the servers market anymore, into making absolutely incredible innovation with their EPYC processors. So for me, it's a great move, and that means also that let's say HPC consumers, I've been involved in one of those projects in the past 3-4 years, are finally getting the ability to kind of challenge a bit the Intel status quo over there. And I think it's an overall also even great move for Intel as well, because it's kind of maybe also a wake-up call, right? I think Intel and Dell have been historically very long partners, have been partnering for very long, and it's kind of giving let's say, it's perhaps a kind of wake-up call, right, to for Intel to kind of let's say speed up things in terms of processor development, in terms of partnership, and being a bit more aggressive overall into how they kind of market themselves. So that's I would say I would close on that thought for today.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's definitely a good thing on multiple fronts. But I think that's the time we've got. Max could talk with you all day about these topics. A lot of fun stuff going on. But looking ahead to the weeks ahead, Storage Field Day is coming up. Storage Field Day 26, coming up the week of on September 18th through the 21st, is happening at the SNIA convention. So Stephen will be there covering a lot of different things. Edge Field Day 2 is coming up. I will be there as well as Stephen. That's happening October 4th and 5th. And then Cloud Field Day 18 is coming up on October 18th and 19th. So there's a lot of good stuff coming up. You can find out more on techfieldday.com about those. But yeah, otherwise, thanks for watching the Gestalt IT Rundown. You can catch new episodes every Wednesday as a YouTube video or on your favorite podcast application. We'll be back next Wednesday to talk about all the IT news and the week that it was. Until then, for myself, for Max, for my friends Stephen Foskett and Tom Hollingsworth, who chose not to show up today, and for all of us at the Gestalt IT family, here's wishing you and yours a linguistic day. Now go read a book.